The dawn over the Blackwater came up thin and gray, like watered milk, and Sansa watched it from the shuttered casement of a tower that had once been Aegon's, though that thought did not warm her. She held the lattice with 2 fingers to feel the cold through the ironwork and let the smell of the river slide in. Tar and damp rope, brine and rotting weed, the faint, yeasty breath of 1,000 waking ovens. The city never slept truly. It only shifted its weight, one shoulder to the other, so that the night sounds of drinking and knives became the morning sounds of wheels and buckets. Somewhere below her a bell sounded twice, unhurried. Somewhere far off a crier sang the day's meat in a voice with more pride than its subject warranted. There was a godswood in the Red Keep, a poor candle to Winterfell's hearthfire. But Sansa still went when the sun was not yet ready to be seen. She wrapped her cloak close, soft, dyed a Tyrell green that had come into her possession by kindness she hadn't asked for, and cut through corridors that whispered of the dead. In Winterfell the halls had been honest. When they gave back sound it was because there had been laughter or footsteps to receive it. Here the stones murmured even when she was still, as if speaking to themselves about bargains and secrets. The guards posted at the cells and intersections straightened when she passed, and she learned to keep her eyes ahead, chin-tipped as she had seen her mother do when she did not intend to be questioned. The godswood had no heart tree. It had a pool that remembered leaves and a low-bowed elm that leaned like an old man over a table, and hardy ivy whose persistence had a northern courage. She stood by the pool and watched her breath gather and fade above the water. The air smelled of damp earth and something that might be old blood beneath it. In Winterfell she had knelt before a red face carved into living bark. She had carried prayers like little birds cupped in her hands and set them free among the branches to be known. Here the prayers had no face to land upon. Still, she offered them for her family wherever the world had scattered them, north, south, into dark. For Tyrion, whose cruelty had been so bright, she did not say the prayers aloud. In this city, words could sprout legs and walk far away from the mouths that made them. When she rose from the pools, margin the dew had emptied itself into the ground, and the sun had scraped a pale coin's worth of light up over the walls. In the waking hours the kitchens sent up their breath through every lattice. In Winterfell, she had known cooks by name and temper, and which would slip her the burned sugar top of a tart, and which would catch her wrist gently and say, "Now, my lady," not before table. Here the kitchens were vast and many, and seemed to belong to no person at all. They belonged to the Red Keep, the way lung belongs to chest. She swallowed down the hunger the smells provoked, because a lady did not tear bread with her fingers in corridors. There would be breakfast prepared, set under silver lids that trapped the steam, in a chamber whose windows were polished daily, though no one looked out of them. In King's Landing the thyme was always too strong, the parsley stale at the stalk, the bread perfect and soft and tasting of nothing. Lemon pastries came sometimes, and when she closed her eyes there was old Nan's rough thumb pressing sugar from the corners of her mouth, and Arya laughing with her tongue painted bright from the berries she'd stolen, and Sansa would bite carefully, precisely, and make no sound at all. The queen-to-be liked lemon cakes as well. Margaery Tyrell had said as much once, almost idly, as if naming the moon, and Sansa had nodded with the grave industry that girls employed with each other when they were trying on intimacy, as if it were a gown they might buy. Margaery had hands fashioned for benedictions. Light, warm, with the strength of a girl who had ridden at a gallop without screaming for the fun of making the men look back. She moved through rooms, as if they consented to the arrangement for her sake. Sansa envied and feared it both. Margaery's grandmother did not move. She occupied. When Sansa was ushered into the solar after breaking her fast, the Queen of Thorns was already ensconced by the window with a lap rug and a basket of embroidery silk so fierce in hue that they looked like something wrung from the tongues of parrots. On the table before her lay a sprig of rosemary, bruised so that the room wore it as perfume. "You look better when you're chilled," the old woman said without preamble, eyes narrowing in pleasure. The cold steals damp from the face. King's Landing ruins us with its air. Sit, child. Does my talk unnerve you? Good. Better to be unnerved by words than by the other things this place offers. Sansa sat. She chose her chair as carefully as she chose her expressions. The room trembled behind a veneer of stillness. Margaery's comb left gleams of light in her hair with each long stroke. A small fire chewed a knot of wood. A page boy outside tripped in a way that said he had been pushed and pretended he had not. Her Grace is attending to the seamstresses, Margaery said, turning the comb. The bodice for tomorrow is not to her liking, and the bodice must be to her liking, or the city will fall. Her smile had edges. Grandmother will pass the time by instructing us both. Bah, Olenna said, and a silk thread snapped between her fingers. Instruction implies method and patience. I offer neither. I have questions. When I am satisfied with the answers, I will be silent. Sansa inclined her head. The old woman's eyes were not kind eyes, but they were honest. Honesty in this place was rare, and should be put into a jar like expensive ointment. Ask them, my lady. Good, Olenna said again, softer. Why do you come to the God's Wood when there is no proper God to hear you? Because I wish to be heard. And who hears you, child, in a garden with no face? Myself, Sansa said. She had not known the answer until it came. She held it as if it were warm. Neen. The Queen of Thorns rolled the sound in her mouth as if tasting it for seeds. Better than most. Next. If a boy who has not yet learned the weight of a crown is placed beneath one, who should hold the brim so it does not cover his eyes? His mother? His grandfather? A clever girl with a soft voice and a spine that has been tempered in northern winters. Sansa felt her heart knock once, then settle. She made herself look to Margaery's comb, as if this were only ladies' talk, and her next breath did not catch. A council, she said, so that no one pair of hands tires. Clever councils have been made before. Olenna said. They often feature men who never tire because they never carry any weight. Margaery set down the comb. The light made a net upon the top of her head. Grandmother. Oh, hush, said the old woman without looking. I do not mean to bite her. I mean to find her teeth. Child, she went on, returning her gaze to Sansa. If a council must be formed, it must be formed of the persons who can see what the boy cannot. Your sweet kitten king will need to be kept from fires, and also from the water. Boys are most ingenious in the methods by which they add to their own harms. We will need the spider to tell us where the web sticks to walls. We will need me, though saying so bores me. And we will need a lady the people will not fear. Damn tea. A lady, Sansa said, and it sat heavy in her chest. Your granddaughter is beloved. Oh, she is, Olenna said. She is beloved in the way a summer wine is beloved, eagerly, and with laughter, and with too much speed. I wish to be beloved like dark bread. Daily, reliable, without praise, complained over only when absence forces taste. She smiled then suddenly, and her face, which had looked carved, warmed with mischief. And you, little wolf with a lamb's eyes, are already beloved without anyone remembering to say so. The city sees you and thinks, that girl has suffered. The city thinks, that girl did not choose. The city thinks what it wishes, and because what it wishes is pity, it is convinced of your harmlessness. That is a potent tincture. Drink it. Learn to build it drop by drop. Da. Sansa felt the room tilt, imperceptibly. She kept her hands folded in her lap, so that her fingers would not betray her. What would you have me do? Walk with Margaery, Olenna said. Read to the boy. Ask the cooks to sweeten the milk before bed in his presence. Let the wives of the fishermen speak to you of the price of salt. When their daughters marry, let them kiss your cheek, and do not flinch at the fish on their hands. If you see a gutter child stealing a fig, cut the fig in half yourself. Ensure you are seen doing so. Then pinch his ear for show. Then give him the smaller half. Tell the boy that a crown is a duty, and that duty is dull, but worthy. Tell him often, for he will forget. And when men begin to speak, as they will, of who will keep the crown upon his head, be present. Say little at first, then say more. When you cannot be wise, be kind. Kindness is remembered in ways, wisdom is not. Bah. Varys arrived later that day, announced by his own breath, which always seemed to precede him like an agreeable scent. He had the look of a soft night-blooming creature. Lids heavy, smile arranged generously on the lower shelf of his face, hands tucked like children under a blanket. Sansa had learned to watch his fingers. Such hands were often too still. The spider, she had thought at first with the childish cruelty the city taught its young, and then later, when she had watched him ease a piece of copper into a woman's palm in the market, with a flippant grace that made it seem nothing. She had thought, a steward of smaller hungers. "My ladies," he said, bowing, "I bring a gift." "Your gifts smell of ink," Olenna said. "Spare us." "Not ink," Varys said. He looked to Sansa with a brightness that warmed and frightened at once. Memory taught him too. From the sleeve of the robe that never wrinkled, he drew a small thing, wrapped in a piece of blue silk. He offered it to Sansa with two hands. She unfolded it and found, nestled in the cloth like the last acorn of a poor autumn, a winter rose made in embroidery, its threads so cunningly dyed that the frost upon the petals had the color of a shadow. The stitches were tight and close, as if the flower had been kneaded from light. "I had it from a northern woman who died last winter," Varys said softly. "She came south with her husband and found the air took him. She sewed to keep the hunger from her door. She said once she had seen a girl pass in the market who walked as if she did not trust the ground. She said she found her own feet better when she watched that girl walk. She took to making these. She sold them but kept this one. She told me it was for a certain day, though she did not know which. She never found it. I have an impertinent belief it is this day. Lenderan." Sansa touched the rose and knew the trick of it, the way a certain number of counted threads told of a lifetime of work with needle and eye. She felt a cold in her chest that had nothing to do with the air. "Thank you." And because gratitude soothed him, he smiled wider. "Tomorrow," Varys said to Olenna, "we will have our feast. The city will eat through its grief with song and meat. It will have something to talk about besides hunger and heat. A good thing. Eating and talking are safer together than separately." He looked to Sansa again. "There are times when history takes an open door, and there are times when one must fashion the latch oneself. Our boy will need a door held." "Our boy," Olenna repeated tartly. "I do not recall begetting any such creature, though the number of times I have been accused." Varys spread his hands. "We are all fathers and mothers of the realm when the realm is needy, my lady. Even those of us who have been relieved of those particular obligations." He glanced downward, made a face of benevolent apology, and Sansa found herself stifling a laugh she did not trust. That he could steal a smile like that, the skill of it frightened her more than the content. He left them a list when he departed, written in a hand so round it looked like a child's, and thereby innocent. The names were small and unimportant. A scribe, a boy who filled the lamps in the king's corridor, a seamstress with a scar in the shape of a crescent on her thumb, a certain guardsman who gambled poorly and loved too well. "Friends," Varys had said, "the city is a net, and I am forever concerned with its knots. If one knows the knots, one knows how to carry weight without tearing." Sansa slept poorly that night. The moon pressed its white coin to her window again and again, as if to be let in. Tyrion snored softly on the other side of the chamber's wall. When she had first been given these rooms, she had expected iron between them and found only wood. Now she listened to his breathing and felt shamefully safer than if there had been a dozen mailed arms outside her door. It was easier to think of the kindnesses than the rest. He had turned his face aside the night of their marriage, and offered her the same turn in his voice when he had spoken. Polite, a little weary, as if he were apologizing for the shape of the world. In a city where kindness clattered like a tin coin, it was an affront to her that his had the sound of silver. She rose before the bell and washed in water that had cooled. She wore a dress the color of new leaves, its sleeves embroidered with a thin border of frostwork in thread that looked white, until the light struck it, and then looked blue. Marjorie's doing, or her women's, or perhaps the grandmother's. Who would have entertained herself with such an irony? She braided her hair herself. She pinched her cheeks to encourage a blush that the city had stolen from her. When she stepped into the corridor, there was a little boy waiting with a basket and a note. And she took from the basket a lemon cake still warm enough to breathe. In the note, there was only a line of verse, anonymous and old. The winter wind may strip the branch, but what clings in frost can bloom again. She ate half the cake and tore the other half in careful pieces, leaving them in places where she knew small hands could find them without being found themselves. The day unfolded itself like a long napkin. The septies' bells were polished. The singers warmed their voices, and their scales ran like water down a marble stair. The cooks folded pastry, and the pastry sighed when pricked. The master of coin, who was not a master of numbers or much else, practiced smiling in a mirror until the muscles learned their duty, then ruined it by adding words to the smile. The Queen Mother rehearsed anger as if it were a hymn, fixing it to a line she knew well. The hand rubbed the place between his eyes, as if there were a piece of grit beneath the skin he could rub out into the light. Servants scoured benches. Grips slid knives on steel. Pages ran. The city itself leaned forward, and in that forward leaning you could hear the breath draw, ready to sing or to gasp. Sansa stood with Marjorie in a chamber whose windows had been dressed in white. The sea beyond was made of hammered silver. "You will sit with me at table," Marjorie said. "You will come when the time is called to put sweet upon the king's plate. When the mummers grow bold, you will laugh, but no more than once." "I never know how much to laugh," Sansa said, and hated the truth of it as soon as it left her mouth. "That," Marjorie said, "is because the laughter is not for you." She took Sansa's hand and squeezed once, hard enough to be felt. Her eyes had kindness in them, even when her mouth practiced the curves it would need. It is a bad thing to discover, but not the worst. The feast did all the things feasts are built to do. It made dull men expansive and clever, men careless. It put oil into tongues and slackness into jaws. It lifted the world's weight from shoulders for a little while and encouraged foolishness enough to keep itself interesting. The king was pleased, which made the tables a safer place to be. It was a barnyard thing to watch happiness feed. It pecked and strutted and demanded more. But it kept its beak for a time and was good company while it stayed. Sansa did as Marjorie had told her. She laughed when the dwarfs tumbled, though she had thought better of the men before they put on the heads and clanged the tin crowns together. She let herself be a window, not a picture. Visible, unremarkable, something noticed without being seen. She watched Tommen watch the cake that would be cut and set upon his plate. She saw Joffrey's mouth when he drank and saw the piece of purple that stuck to his lip. She counted the breaths between the moment a jest turned and the moment a man received the turn as insult. She counted the distance to the door, the number of logical reasons it would be permissible for her to rise and go to it and be gone, and whether vanishing would be worse or better. In the instant that matters most in such days, there were too many sounds for anyone to be named. The scrape of chairs, the glee uneasy, the hiss of wine in throat, a cough, the cough again, a hand at a collar. Cersei's voice called his name as a song calls a dog. Tywin's hand did not move to help, because a hand does not lift for panic. The cough became a choke, became a noise that did not belong in a king's chest. The music did the worst thing, which was to continue. The music stopped. The boy performed the human effort to breathe as if the body, taught all its life that breath was owed, had been presented a bill it did not expect and refused. The Queen Mother rose. Men rose. Sansa did not move, because the old woman had told her not to move until there was nothing else to do. She held the edge of the table with her fingers and watched history find its latch. Later she would discover how many different hues the human face could take on when denied its favorite air. Later she would smell bitterness on the cloth that had been pressed to lips, and somewhere in that bitterness would be the memory of lemons and a feeling she would not name. Later the city would retell it with such gusto that the story would have 1,000 fathers and no mother. Later there would be tears, where there had been none, and laughter, where there had only been noise. Later she might even be alone long enough to be sick, and grateful for it. In the moment itself she saw only Tommen's small, worried face, white, and the way his hands began to creep toward the cat beneath the table, as if to steal comfort in a place where comfort would not be looked for. She stepped sideways, no more movement than that, so that she stood between him and the sight of his brother bending and clawing the air. She did not touch him. She stood like a door in a draught. Varys' hand appeared near her elbow and did not take it. "My lady," he murmured. "The corridors will be choked shortly. You should not go far from where you are to be seen." "Yes," Sansa said. Her mouth was dust. She did not know whether she had spoken until he inclined his head. He passed her a cloth, white, plain, and she held it ready, though she knew not for what. The king died with less dignity than a fisherman. The room learned that there are moments when even a chamber full of enemies is not a battle, but a yard full of animals, when the barn burns. People ran toward, people ran away. Cersei's keening had a pit in it, a true pit, and Sansa thought, "There is a place in this woman that is not metal." That was not forgiveness, but it was knowledge, and it knocked once in her chest. Tyrion's face was a mask without rehearsal. It had been arranged for other plays. He looked down at the boy who had been a tyrant, and then up at the mother who had been tyrannized by her own love, and then over to his father, whose calm was a cold sea that swallowed storms. Sansa did not have to imagine, because the city, obliging, showed her. The future in which she moved like a mouse in a field with an owl in the trees. All it would take was the smallest shadow. She put the white cloth to her lips and told herself to breathe as if she were teaching a stubborn child. They ushered her from the hall when ushering became possible. Margaery came, white as the table linen. The Queen of Thorns was a stake driven into the floor, and none moved her. "Do not run," she said to no one and everyone. "There is nowhere to run to that is not here." That night, the city spoke in 100 tongues. The street of silk sang it. The street of flour kneaded it into loaves. The street of sisters prayed it. The bells in the sept did not peal. They tolled in thoughtful singular strokes, as if admitting the existence of death but refusing to gossip about it. The moon put its face against the casement and said nothing at all. Sansa sat in a small chair in a small room outside a larger room, where 2 Kingsguard took turns standing utterly still, and she read to a boy. Tommen was tired through to his bones. Grief came to him like sleep, often, uninvited, in patches. He stroked the cat's ear in a rhythm that quieted both of them, and watched her mouth the way a child watches the sea. She had chosen a tale with a little dragon in it that would not burn a field without permission, and a girl who asked the dragon to light candles for her in a storm. She made her voice gentle. The boy smiled at the careful dragon, and in the space of that smile, nothing more than the wideness of 2 lips, Sansa planted a seed. When he slept, finally, face damp, cat kneading the coverlet as if it could work sorrow into warmth by motion alone, Sansa rose and stood by the window. The black water at night was a tongue tasting the city stones. She thought of her father in a square with the sky a hard bowl above him. She thought of her mother and the green river, and of a son and a wedding, and too much red. She thought of the boy who had died, and the boy who had lived, and of another boy, far away perhaps, who had been called by the wrong name all his life, so that men could sleep better. She thought of Tyrion's face when it had gone still, and for a moment she loved and hated him for giving her kindness in a room where it did not belong. Varys came as a soft thought. He came like a kindness one might not trust. He stood a little distance off and arranged his hands in their folded cradle. "Grandmother wishes me to say that the old women have put on their best cloaks and gone to the sept to pray that boys will not be made to serve as kings. It is one of the better prayers. It does not work." He tipped his head. "She also wishes to know whether you are ready to be what she and I imagine." "What do you imagine?" Sansa asked, keeping her voice low so that the boy's breath would not change. "A regent who is not named a regent," Varys said. "A sister by proxy." An answer to a question that is asked by those who sell fish and those who count coin. Who looks at that boy and sees not a sack of gold, but a child? We will name you nothing. We will only place you where naming is done. The Queen Mother will have her title and her fire. The Hand will have his ledgers and his law. The Tyrells will have their gardens and their full tables. You will have the boy's ear, which is a small thing that in time opens into the head. Menawai. I am a Stark, Sansa said softly. And I am a Lannister's wife. Ah, Varys said. And there was no triumph in it, only recognition. You are a Stark who has learned Lannister rooms. It is a frightening alloy, my lady. I have seen worse forged into crowns and better made into knives. We must be careful what we ask you to be. He glanced at Tommen, sleeping. His face softened as if before beauty or food. He will need lessons in mercy. It is a difficult subject to teach. Most masters of it are poor scholars in other things. Ben, you ask me to do more than read to him, Sansa said. Yes, Varys said. I ask you to trick the city into becoming kinder by making it believe it has chosen kindness. I ask you to stand where crowds can recognize your shape and forget to fear. I ask you to let women touch you with hands that have flour in the nails. I ask you to learn which guards have mothers they visit on the first day of the week and which have sisters who borrow their pay. I ask you to eat fish that is not entirely fresh and smile anyway. I ask you to cry once properly in public, only once, and choose the day with care. I ask you to be dull in counsel until you are not. I ask you to be patient until patience looks like power. He paused. I ask you to survive. I have found that the realm seldom makes good use of the dead. What will you do? Sansa said. What I always do, Varys answered with a tiny shrug. I will carry words from one room where they are too heavy to another room where they are too light. I will teach the boy to listen when listening serves him, and to pretend to listen when it does not. I will find which of the bakers gives his stale loaves to the street children and make him baker to the king. I will take small men who wish to be large and put them in places where largeness looks different than they imagine. I will ask the Ironbanked to be patient by promising them dancers. I will bring the Queen of Thorns numbers, and she will bring me knives. We will be tedious, my lady. It is the best thing we can be. Nenchan. Sansa let the silence after his speech be what it was. She let it bear weight. Outside, the river's tongue continued its work. Inside, a boy breathed the soft sleep of the exhausted. Sansa thought of the godswood, with no face, and of answering herself. She thought of her mother's hands. She imagined how they would have arranged the coverlet at the child's shoulder. She did as she imagined. The cat opened one eye and admitted her. How do I begin? She said at last. You began this morning in the godswood, Varys said, and smiled. Tomorrow you will sit with the Queen of Thorns when the small council comes to tally outrage. She will be deaf in one ear, and you will lean in on that side when they speak. They will think they have been charming, and you will know who believes what, because they will raise their voices when lying. You will drop your handkerchief. No one will pick it up. You will pick it up yourself. It is good for the city to see a lady bending. Then you will ask for the boy's steward to be named. You will give them 3 names, all of which we have chosen. They will choose the worst of the 3 because men hate admitting debt. This is fine. Why? We will have made room around him. And Cersei? Sansa asked quietly, almost a prayer that was not for a god. Ah, Varys said, and the smile left him. She is a forest fire in a dry season. We will not put her out. We will make cuts around what we cannot spare. She will be Queen Regent in name and in some fact. She will rage. Rage is not patient enough to rule alone for long. The boy will be shield, and Marjorie will be sealed, and Marjorie will be balm, and you will be something more ordinary, and thus more necessary. You be a habit. Habits are difficult to create, Sansa said. Yes, Varys agreed. That is why they endure. Olenna entered without knocking. She had a shawl like a garden pulled over her head, and it made a humor of her. She lifted it off as if discarding mercy. Enough cooing, she said. We work now. They worked like laundresses and like thieves. Olenna sent a tray to Pycelle's chambers with stewed prunes and instructions to leave the old man to his bowels until noon. She put a whisperer with the Master of Coin's wife, so that a certain list of gifts would be known before the council sat, and thereby could not be threatened as if it were kindness. Varys arranged for 2 lamps to be removed from the small council chamber. The room would be a shade darker, and men were always a shade truer in dimness. Sansa rehearsed nothing because rehearsals are for plays, and the day would be anything but. She smoothed Tommen's hair when he stirred and read again, when his eyelids fluttered and hummed a song. She remembered from the kitchens at Winterfell, in a voice that was not hers, and then, by constant use, became so. When the hour came, Sansa walked with Olenna's arm crooked through hers and Marjorie at her other side. The corridor to the council chamber was polished and self-important. The guards looked past them, the way guards look past women who do not shout. Inside, the table had its old familiar faces and its new ones. Tywin, cut from the idea of discipline, Mace Tyrell with all the confidence of a man who had been told all his life that the large things were his, but had been handed only the small, and had never learned the difference. Pycelle, or rather the space his infirmity made. A Tyrell cousin placed like a flower. A lord with a thin mustache and thinner loyalty. The spider, the Cersei, of course, a flag hung from a keep in a wind that had not yet decided its direction. Lady Sansa, Tywin said, and gave her recognition like a coin. This is not a seat for girls. It is a seat near the boy, Olenna said before Sansa could shape a reply, and eased herself into the chair as if she had been born there. And girls are less trouble than half the men I see here, so you should be grateful. Cersei's eyes were knives. We do not entertain jests at council when the king is dead. No, said Olenna, unkind as a truth. We do not entertain anything. We work. Men sing dirges as if deeds, but they are only noise. Among my people, we lay out the dead and set to laying out the day. Men shall all. Sansa sat on the chair that had been set for her, a little back from the table, as if ready to rise at a word. She drew in breath as if the room had loaned it to her. She kept her hands folded. When men spoke, she tilted her head toward Olenna's left ear. They raised their voices, obedient, and the old woman smiled without showing any teeth. The quarrel was not about the dead boy. Not truly. It was about the ways in which power pretends to be grief in order to justify its own appetite. They argued titles and orders and the funeral train, and how tall the candles should be, and who would be seen to weep. Over and around and beneath it was the question none of them could answer yet. What shape would power wear next, and how quickly could they force it to try on the clothes they had spent a lifetime preparing? When the room had circled itself twice and begun on a third orbit, Sansa let her handkerchief slip. It fell like a small gull. No one moved. She stooped, elegant, and picked it up herself. In the bottom of her eyes there was reflection enough to make the men see their own faces. When she straightened, she spoke in the voice she had used by Tommen's bed. "The king will wish a steward," she said. "He should not wake with new men at his fire. He should not eat food cooked by mouths he does not know. We should make a name for him to ask for when he wishes a cup in the night." She looked not at Tywin nor at Cersei, but at a corner where the lamplight had failed to conquer entirely. It would be a pity if his first memories of rule were of strangers. Tywin turned his head to regard her. He did not yet look at her as at an opponent. He looked at her the way a man looks at a dog that has spoken. "And you have a name, Lady Sansa?" "I have 3, Sansa said. "Lawless cousin Rennie, who is gentle and cannot be bought because he has never won a bargain and so does not know how. 7, the baker's son, who gives the stale loaf to a girl with a bent back when he thinks no one sees. And Lady Tarria's steward's nephew, who counts without moving his lips. Mel. Petty." Cersei said, disgust curling in her mouth like a slug. "Necessary," Olenna said. "High seats are held by men of consequence. Bedsides belong to those with no consequence at all. Wise houses recognize which holds the day. They grumbled. They scoffed. They made a show of choosing. Rennie was named because he was least like anyone's idea of a piece on a board. Sansa let herself breathe. It was not victory. It was not even a one skirmish. It was perhaps the edge of a field cleared of stones. But boys fall in fields cleared of stones less often. On the way from the chamber, Sansa passed a servant girl with cracked lips, carrying a tray of watered wine for the guards. The girl could not help but look. Women in gowns are an occupation for the eyes of those who must carry heavy things. Sansa paused, took one cup, and held it as if thinking. Then she lifted it to the girl's mouth. "Drink," she said quietly. The girl obeyed, eyes panic-wide at the kindness, in case it were a trap. She drank too much, coughed, let a little spill, bobbed a curtsy with her head too low, hurried on. In the turn of the corridor, Varys appeared again. "You are good at this," he said, as if remarking upon her embroidery. "I am not good," Sansa said. "Good at this," Varys repeated gently. "Goodness is a different study." He left her by the window that looked down over the river and the city it fed, and was fed by. The day had turned itself toward afternoon. Banners dragged in a wind too tired to make a point. The Red Keep sat like a spider that had fallen asleep in its own web and forgotten its hunger for an hour. Sansa placed her palm against the glass and felt the weak warmth of spring tickle her skin. She had imagined ruling once, without knowing she imagined it. As a child, she had arranged pebbles in a careful circle around a puddle to keep her reflection neat. And that had been a kind of rule. Girls ruled dolls and songs and the facts of their hair. They practice on small, forgiving things, and sometimes the practice is all they are given. She thought of Arya's ungentle hair and smiled, because she could see her sister refusing the circle of pebbles, scattering them with a boot. She thought of Jon, whose face came to her in bits and pieces, a forlorn mosaic made of winters and words. She thought of Robb, and the thinking was a clean wound. She thought of her mother again, and of Catelyn's face in that last remembered morning in Winterfell. A dawn as thin as this one, with a cup between them and a series of future days lined like folded shirts in a drawer, ready to be put on. She had a choice. In King's Landing, choices were like knives set point up beneath silk. She could decline the invitation and let the men make her into a story that needed no rebuttal, because it had always been told and retold without her. She could flee and be hunted. She could remain and become a thing left on a windowsill to collect dust and pity. Or she could pick up the silk and put her hand to the knives herself, testing their edges, choosing which to dull, which to turn outward, which to hide. She watched the river lick the stones and made herself remember the taste of snow. That evening, when the light had thinned to the color of old parchment, she stood again in the godswood that was not, and listened to the water from the thin fall over the rock. It was not the sound of Winterfell, but if she closed her eyes, it had a cousin's voice. She spoke no words. She watched a beetle work itself over a rib of bark, and thought of the Queen of Thorns and her needles, of Varys and his invisible threads, of Margaery and her careful warmth, of Tommen's small hand on the cat's fur. Press, release, press. The beetle reached the top of the bark and did not congratulate itself. It simply went on. The next day would be letters. After that, food. After that, guards. After that, the shape of a council that did not call itself a regency, but behaved like one. After that, perhaps law. After that, there would be moments of absurdity, choosing the pattern of the king's winter cloak, forbidding a pie shaped like a boar for reasons no one would say aloud, sending a handful of salt up the river to a village that thought itself forgotten, and learning that the village had always sent ferrymen to the city's worst days and never asked thanks. After that, there would be rage too, inevitable and deserved and terrible. The world did not become kind because one asked it to. The world needed teaching. She opened her eyes. The pool did not hold her reflection for long before some small current broke it. "I will try," she said in the quiet. It was not a vow. It was not the language of childhood anymore. She did not ask to be heard. She heard herself. When she turned to go, a boy was waiting on the path outside the godswood. He had a scar like a crescent on his thumb, and he bobbed a motion that might have been a bow if it had not been a boy's. "My lady," he said. The queen asks, "The other one?" "The old one." He blushed to have said it thus. "Thank you," Sansa said, and did not ask his name because asking names here was often the same as owning them. "Tell her I come." He hesitated. "The cat is in the king's bed. The boy is smiling. Sir said to move it." The other sir said no. "I thought you should know." Sansa smiled. "Thank you," she said again, and began the work of teaching the city its new habit. Pa. By morning the white cloth had dried without stain, and Sansa folded it into a neat square and set it beneath the little winter rose Varys had given her. In the stillness of the hour before bells, the Red Keep wore its own breath like a veil. She found Rennie already at his post outside Tommen's chambers, a thin boy in a too large jerkin, his hair combed until it lay down like a field after rain. He straightened as if expecting a scold for some offense he had not yet learned. "Does his grace sleep?" Sansa asked softly. "He dreams and does not, my lady," Rennie said with careful humility. "Sometimes the cat needs his shoulder and he laughs in his sleep and that shakes him awake again. I put the milk to warm and sweeten, as you said." He looked pleased and frightened at once, which was how he would look, she suspected. "For a while yet, you will keep the lamp wick trimmed low," she said. "When he wakes, the light should greet but not scold him. Only the cat may be bright in the night." "Then shall." "Yes, my lady." Inside, Tommen sat cross-legged upon the coverlet, hair disordered, cheeks pink from having rubbed them in his sleeve. Sir Pounce occupied the pillow with the entitlement of a small lord. The boy looked up with a smile that had the shape of apology and welcome both. He was in a shirt with embroidered cuffs, and he was trying not to fret the thread loose. "Good morning, your grace," Sansa said, letting the title settle as something gentle, not heavy. "I have brought you a story with a river in it, and a little boy who listens to the river so well that one day it listens back." "Do rivers listen?" Tommen asked, wonder winning over grief for a moment. "When spoken to kindly," she answered. And in the corner, Rennie set the warm cup upon the little table exactly where Sansa had shown him the night before. Spoon turned just so. A slice of toasted bread beside it, the crust cut off without ceremony, and the end saved for a bird later. Tommen reached, then remembered, as a boy who has learned new manners does, and looked to Sansa. She nodded. He drank, and his shoulders unknotted. She had chosen a book with pages thin and plentiful, and a hand like a friendly aunt's, and she read of reeds and sun and a boat that went where it was told, because the child who steered it did not expect magic, only obedience and patience, which often produce the same result. Tommen's head tilted. "There's a part I like most," he said when she paused to let the milk do its work, "where the little boy tells the river that even if it is noisy, it is not bad. It is only being itself. Shall we practice?" Sansa said. "You will be told all your life, your grace, that quiet is good and noise is wicked. But sometimes noise is only a city waking up. Tell the river so." He looked toward the window where the Blackwater's patient mouth lay unseen and said softly, "You are yourself. I am myself. I will not shout at you for being what you are." "Very good," Sansa said. "Now eat your bread, or Rennie will be offended." Rennie pretended to be deeply affronted, and Tommen grinned. And in that grin Sansa heard, faintly, the latch of a door shift. When she left the boy to the routines she had begun to braid around him. Cat's ear scratching, warm milk, quiet voice, a little counting upon the fingers for steadiness. She found Marguerite waiting in the antechamber. Hair braided for simplicity, gown the green of a hedgerow slick with damp. He smiled. Marguerite said, not as boast or claim but as report, and Sansa nodded. It was an accounting between them already. "We will measure the day in smiles. We will learn the boy the way other women learn recipes." They walked together as if they were only women visiting a neighbor, and not a queen-to-be and a wolf's daughter passing under stone that had listened to treason and prayer without preference. At the turn toward the Queen Mother's apartments they paused. The air wore wine and fear in equal measures. Marguerite's hand brushed Sansa's sleeve, and the touch said, We will not go in together. Sansa inclined her head. There were dances in King's Landing that were performed without music, and this was one. The Queen-to-be and the Queen-mother must not be seen to arrive in harmony, and yet harmony was what would preserve the boy. Olenna's solar was lit too brightly for the hour, in defiance of Varys' preference for lamplight honesty. She had laid a map of the city upon the table, and weighted its corners with objects that would not stray. An ivory spool, a lemon, a small stone washed smooth, and a carved stag with thin legs. Varys stood behind the chair he favored, hands tucked, the very image of one who meant to sit only when invited, but who would, when invited, never quite commit to the chair. "Your hand is oiling his bow," Olenna said in lieu of greeting, "and your lioness gnaws her own tail. Mace has told a stable lad to tell another stable lad to tell yet another that he is master of coin, and I have a mind to let him, if only that I might be entertained. The Septi has not decided whether to be holy or political, which means it will be both and bad, at either, until someone shows it a mirror. It is a morning. Sit." Then Sansa sat. "I have made the boy a little river," she said. And Varys, whose ears were always tuned to the register of children, smiled. "Well done," Olenna said. "We will build him a bank and make sure he does not drown when the city floods him with love or fear or both." Varys let a small parchment slip from his sleeve onto the map, as if it were a leaf falling exactly where it had been told. "A list of voices today," he said. "That will not need raising in the council if we have already heard them in the hall." The names were small again, and unimportant, and all the world. Sansa read. The steward who had once been a boy to a boy who had now become a guardsman, and had learned in that employment that standing still can be a form of cruelty. A fishwife who had led a quiet deputation last summer when the eels crawled with sickness. The lamp boy who liked to polish the glass until the flame doubled. And, tucked among them like a folded corner, 3 women who had never been in the same room, and who now would be, because the Queen of Thorns had decided the room must fit them. "You will give them chairs and a bowl of salted plums," Olenna said. "You will allow them to interrupt one another once, and then not again. And you will let them see you take the interruptions with good temper. The city has been taught by its masters that being heard is an indulgence. We will teach it that being listened to is a habit." Sansa thought of the godswood that was not, and its pool which refused a reflection too long. "You will teach me what to say when they ask for everything. You will say we can give them bread and not forgiveness for the world," Olenna said briskly. "You will say we can give them salt and measure and vats that do not leak. You will say we cannot give them their dead back, but we can keep other men's hands off the carts when we send grain to the poor. You will say that if a guildmaster corners flour with his clever cousins, we will uncorner it with soldiers. You will say that if they see a soldier steal, they can tell Rennie. Yes, you, child. Look at me as if I have put a sword in your hand. And the soldier will wake the next morning to find his post is at the gate that faces the sea, and his bed is on the stone. Consequence is a language these streets understand." "They will ask for the price of salt to be halved," Varys said mildly. "And for the fish to cost what it cost when they were children. They will ask for their sons to be apprenticed to the more gentle arts, and yet to earn coin as if they had sweated at the fort. They will ask for the king to be a baker," Olenna said. "We will tell them the king will be a boy who eats what is set before him and says please. It is less than they want and more than they have had, and so they will consent to it for a time." Nandaru. Sansa ran her finger along the eastern edge of the map, where the walls traced their old stubborn line. "And if they ask for the Lannisters to be gone, then we say that a city cannot shed its stones for being heavy," Olenna said. "It learns to build with what it has until it can quarry different rock. Your husband," the word hung like an ornament before a cat's paw, Dashi, Sansa said quietly, and with more steadiness than she felt. "My husband will be named an enemy by noon if the Queen Mother has her way. She has her way more often when it is a narrow path," Varys murmured. "This is a field. Lord Tywin will not run across it for her. There will be an arrest," he added with gentle sorrow, "because men love a shape to point at when the air is troubled. It will be managed. A trial will be promised. A trial is a pause, which is a kindness in politics. Sansa's breath touched her lip, and her lip trembled once, then learned itself. "He was kind to me," she said. And it was as much prayer as fact. Kindness does not drown in accusation, Varys said. It remembers how to float. Olenna's mouth clicked like a bead set upon thread. "You are fond of the dwarf, child," she observed. "Not cruelly, only noting weather. That is inconvenient and perhaps commendable. When the wheel turns, sentiment may keep you from being crushed, if only because you will not stand too close to its spokes." "Then so, grandmother," Margaery said from the doorway, her voice like cool water. "If you will have done making philosophy, we have to make meat and drink." She entered with her easy smile, which could be set upon her face quickly, but never looked hurried. "Lord Tywin has called the council to noon. Mother would have it at dawn. The seven only know when it will be. In the meantime, flour has arrived from the south and is already becoming more flour in the telling." "Men shall see." "Of course it is," Olenna said. "Flour always becomes more flour in men's mouths and less flour in women's bowls. Send Savin. Put him in the baker's hall and tell him he is now a very important liar. He will insist upon measures and weights like a painful husband insists upon punctuality. And send the girl with the cracked lips to stand with him and drink whenever a man says the word scarcity rather than greed." "She is ready," Varys said, which Sansa understood in two directions. Before noon, the old truths returned and tried to make themselves new. Bells, still solemn from the night's work, told. Cersei strode like a flame, which is hot and fierce and annihilates itself when there is nothing left to burn. Lord Tywin's calm arranged space around him, and then stood in it as if in a courtyard he had designed. Men bowed and wondered what bowing meant. Tyrion was fetched from the hall where he had been 30 paces from the boy, because Cersei demanded it and the city, for the moment, wished to see something brought, and Tyrion was a more visible thing than poison on a tart. Sansa watched him walk between white cloaks. He did not look at her. He had always been too deaf to make her a target when his enemies sought one. He held his head at a tilt that suggested curiosity and defense in equal measure. And as he passed her, he let his fingers flick. A nothing, a friendless man shaking off a crumb, except Sansa felt in the space between them the silver of his kindness again. She put both hands on the back of a chair, so that if anyone asked why she stood thus, they would say it was because the chair was solid and not because the world moved. It was not the moment to grieve. It was the moment to learn the faces grief wore on other people. Sansa watched Cersei's mouth, and saw in it the desperate intelligence of a woman who had been told power was man-shaped. She watched Mace Tyrell's assurance grow taller when anyone looked at it. She watched Pycelle bend himself like a reed toward whichever voice was loudest, and saw in that bending the long cracking that comes before old wood breaks. She watched Varys be unremarkable, and thereby remarkable. She watched Tommen be led by a man who had carried him as a baby, and would now carry him as a king, if they balanced the weight between them. When she found the courage to be alone, she went to the small bedchamber that had been given to her because a great lady should not live out of a trunk forever. She closed the door and stood in the quiet and looked into the little mirror with its merciful distortion. And she took from the drawer where she had hidden it the net they had called amethyst, because it pleased them to say jewels had come cheap to a northern girl. It lay like a confession in her hands. When she had worn it, the light had admired it openly. Now it looked dull and heavy. There was a gap in the pattern where a stone had once sat. Small, triangular, unassuming if one did not know how stones hold the heart of a net. The Queen of Thorns did not knock, which was not discourtesy, but a rule of her own house that she had decided to keep everywhere. She entered, shut the door, and in the closing of the door some of the world's noise gentled. "You have my apologies," Olenna said, and that was a sentence Sansa had not thought to hear from her. "For borrowing a thing without asking, for making you an accomplice without a vote, for needing to save my granddaughter with speed rather than fineness." "And now?" Sansa's fingers tightened over the thread. "It is true then," she said, and her voice had shattered on the last word, and then fit itself together without mending. "It is always true that men who derive delight from causing pain are difficult to spare," Olenna said dryly. "It is also true that I choose my fruit when it is ripe, and do not pretend a pear will be sweet in winter if I only wait." He would have turned his cruelty to my girl's children. He would have made the city practice flinching. I am too old to live under flinches. "Me?" Sansa looked down at the little net. "You used me." "I used your presence," Olenna corrected, not unkindly. "You were watched and you would not be searched. I do not expect kindness from the world. I expect usefulness. Your sorrow is mine, child. My anger is my own." She took a breath that looked like a stitch drawn neatly. "Now burn that pretty spider's web. Do not keep a relic of an act for which they will happily hang you if given the thinnest cause. I will send you a belt with pearls in a month, and you will wear it, and we will both agree they are badly strung." "Bah!" Sansa held the net for a moment longer. It was not merely the thing it was. It was a memory of a false future, and of a true danger, and of an old woman's careful fingers very near her hair. She laid it upon the coals with the care of a rite, and when the first thread shrank and curled, and let off a smell like burned sugar, she turned her face away not from the smoke but from the indulgence of watching it go. "Good," Olenna said. "Now we will go and be bored on purpose." They instituted dullness like a liturgy. Sansa went to the Street of Flower and stood in the baker's hall while Savin, solemn with the dignity of a common boy given a scale and a commission, set the weights, wiped the counter, and said the new price clearly, with each number like a door he opened, and then held with his shoulder. Men muttered. One man laughed. The girl with the cracked lips drank when a grizzled fellow said, "Scarcity," and the room chuckled, and in that chuckle, space was made for Sansa to say, lightly, "We will not be scarce of honesty. Flour will be weighed with weights, not wishes." Then Durand. From there she went to the fish market. Not the perfumed corner where noble women pretended at choosing and were really choosing the gossip they would carry home, but the true reek of it, the carts where scales gleamed, and blood made the stones slick, and children, with strong arms, carried buckets as heavy as their chests. A woman with forearms like planks, and a face that had been good-looking in a loud way before grief had narrowed it, spoke at once when she saw Sansa and did not curtsy because her hands were not free. "We were told to water the fish," she said without preface. Spit and tide in her voice. "The men from the gate said so. For softness, they said, but not for the fish. For the numbers." Sansa took the woman's paramour, outrage, and kissed it upon both cheeks in the manner of a lady greeting another lady, and the woman blinked and then barked a laugh. "We can help with numbers," Sansa said. "We have a boy who counts without moving his lips. He will be placed where the barrels are loaded. He will be uninteresting and persistent." She looked at the boys, at the girls, at the old men with fingers that had lost the exactness necessary to ease the flesh from bone. "We will also buy the heads and boil them for broth, for those whose teeth do not wish to argue with bones. A city that does not feed its poor will be fed to them in time." "And the guards?" the woman asked, skeptical but not unwilling. Sansa thought of Varys' list, of which guards went home on the first day of the week, and to whom. "If any guard puts his hand into coin where it should not be, tell Rennie in the king's hall," she said. "He is a boy, and will not be feared yet, and so he will be effective. If the guard has a mother, he will find himself posted to the far gate where the wind speaks a language he does not care to learn. If he has a sister who spends his pay at the dice, he will be made to scrub the stones outside the sept at dawn." She kept her voice easy. "In either case he will be given a last chance, because the city does not improve by breaking every stick that is bent. The second time he steals, he will be shown the ships and asked to attempt his fortune across the water." "Then Msawa, you speak like someone who has lived here all your life," the fishwife said. Half respect, half warning. "I speak like someone who has stayed," Sansa answered, and the woman nodded, recognizing the strength of that particular verb. On the Street of Sisters, she bought 3 candles, and did not haggle so that the woman who had made them could go on making them. in the shadow of the great sept. She paused long enough for the faith to see her, and long enough for the small folk to see the faith see her. The High Septon had sent a message full of incense and concern and the promise of prayers, and Sansa had replied with thanks, and with a request that the sept open its kitchens that evening to those who had no kitchens of their own. "We will send flour and fish heads," she had added, "and the boy will look on and be glad that the 7 count bowls as well as beads." Men who counted beads did not always remember bowls. Sometimes they only admired their reflection in an empty one. When she returned to the keep, they were ready for her to cry. Varys had told her that there would be a day for it, and Olenna had nodded and said, "At the bier. Once. No noise. Let it be a tear that when it falls, the city hears itself breathe." The bier had been set in the sept with candles tall as boys flanking it, and the mother knelt as a mother does, and for a heartbeat, Sansa thought she saw, in that kneeling, a woman who had been told to be iron and had found herself peat. She stood 2 paces behind Margaery, who stood 2 paces behind Cersei, who stood beside the boy. And when the singer's voice rose to speak of kings as if they were all one man in many clothes, Sansa thought of her father again, and of his mouth when he smiled. She let the thought rise to her eyes. She did not wipe it away as it traveled down her cheek. She did not make another to keep it company. The city saw a tear and made of it a story. The Stark girl had a heart. The Stark girl did not shout her grief from the steps, and yet did not deny it. The city wanted its stories to do 2 things at once. She obliged it when she could. After, in the corridors that arch into one another like ribs, Cersei drew alongside her. The Queen Mother had changed her grief from green to black, and it made her look like a piece of night had grown a mouth. "You are kind to the boy," she said, tone deceptively mild. "You were kind to my son." Sansa kept her chin in the position that made her seem taller. "He was the king," she said, which was both true and a safety. "He was your son. You will not be alone with Tommen," Cersei said, not bothering with the lace that other women put over their demands. "You will not speak to him of the North. You will not speak to him of wolves or of winters or of men who are loyal to anything but Lannister gold." Sansa held her breath for the count of 3 as she had learned to do. "I will speak to him of cats and candles and numbers," she said. "If numbers are treason, I will learn new ones." Cersei's mouth twitched, in what might have been the ghost of a smile if the woman had ever been taught to let joy sit long enough for it to be recognized. "You are witty. Witty girls mistake wit for safety. Be careful, Lady Sansa. In this place cleverness draws blood." She stepped away before Sansa could shape an answer, which was its own answer. Lord Tywin kept his counsel as a man keeps a hand upon his own pulse. He sent for Sansa in a manner that did not admit refusal, and then allowed her to stand while he did not. The chamber smelled of parchment and metal. A map lay unrolled with little flags like domestic birds stuck into it where war had made of them carrion in other years. "You will remain where you are," he said without looking to see whether she wished to protest. "You will not be put away because you are useful, and I prefer useful things where I can watch them." He lifted his eyes then, and they pierced as a needle pierces, and then withdraws, leaving only the ache of the hole. "You will not imagine yourself a regent. There will be a queen regent. There will be a hand. There will be councils. There will not be a tale told in the city of a girl who carries a throne in her apron." Sansa folded her hands to keep them from betraying that they had once trembled. "I will imagine myself a habit," she said, borrowing Varys' phrase, and calling it her own with the brazenness of the doomed, or the determined. "Do that," Tywin said, and there was something almost like respect in it, or at least recognition. Habits are difficult to break without damaging the thing that wears them. "In the meantime, you will eat where I tell you, and walk where I say, and sit when summoned. Your husband will be tried when we have rehearsed the play and prepared the audience. There will be no surprises at my theater." She wanted to say he was kind. She wanted to say he is a man, not a theater's prop. She wanted to say I owe him more than silence. Instead, she inclined her head and said, "I will read to the boy and teach him the river." "You will teach him to count," Tywin said flatly. "Men who count do not often burn cities for sport. In the evenings the city exhaled through the mouths of its taverns, and the stories that had been born in the heat of the day wandered the streets, naked and unashamed, inviting anyone who wished to drape them in meaning. A baker's boy told of a lady who had fed him a half cake and pinched his ear. A fisher's daughter said the lady of the king's hall had known the price of salt before she could say it herself, and had not flinched when a fish's eyes stared up at her from a bucket. A guardsman muttered that his mate had been sent to the sea gate because he had taken a coin and had been given another chance anyway, which was humiliating in a way the lash had not been. A priest with a beard like a curtain declared that the Stark girl's single tear had been for the realm. A woman said it had been for a boy, and that was better. In Regency's hill, a widow held a bowl of broth made of heads, and said it tasted like a story she did not know the ending of, and liked it for that reason. In the mornings, the city asked for more such dull miracles, and was given them. Varys arranged that the lamp boy would be seen to take oil from a store at a fair measure, and not to pocket any, and then that he would be seen to scold a man twice his size for dropping a lantern wick into the dust instead of the jar set for it. Women talked, and the talk silted into custom. Sansa kept to her hours. She read to Tommen. She brought the cat. She put a bowl of oranges upon the table and let the boy peel one badly, because bad peelings have a way of liberating lessons from scolds. When he slept, and the cat, well fed on the orange scent that had perfumed everything within a reach of 2 hands, sprawled like a fallen cushion, Sansa spoke with his steward at the door. "You will place his shoes always with the heels touching," she told Rennie, "so that when he reaches for them, he reaches for something that has already learned to be together. You will keep the little knife he uses to cut tarts clean of the taste of the last thing it cut, so that he does not learn the wearying disappointment of a new tart tasting of yesterday's berries. When you must say no, you will not say no, Your Grace. You will say, not yet. He must learn that some things are to be waited for, not denied." Bah! Rennie took it all into him as if he were a floor drinking up a spilled cup of wine. "And when he asks for his brother?" he asked, very quietly. "Then you will say," Sansa answered, no louder, "that he may ask the gods who love children and cats. And you will bring me, and I will read of a river that listens because it is kind." On the 3rd day, a small riot attempted to take shape at the gate where carts entered with grain from the south. It was not a riot in its bones. It was a grievance that had learned to stand up for itself and found in standing that it had grown clumsy. A man used an elbow where words would have worked. A boy used his foot. A guard lifted his hand. The knot tightened, and Sansa, passing in a litter she did not wish for, but had learned was necessary, because sometimes a lady must be seen to be carried, if the message is to be believed, tapped upon the shutter. She did not leap out. She did not make a display. She waited until Varys' men had found their way to either side of the knot, and pried here and nudged there, and placed a small old woman, with a loud voice exactly where a small old woman, with a loud voice does the most good. Sansa stepped down when the sound had shifted from anger to possibility. "What is the matter?" she asked a man who had the look of work done and undone. Sleeves rolled to show sinew, a mouth that would be quick to smile if given the chance and quicker to swear if not. "They have said the carts come tomorrow," he said, fury like a splinter under his nail. "They said the same last week. They think we will grow small while we wait. We will not." Varys had told her the truth of it an hour before. The carts had come and been waylaid by a cousin of a man who thought himself clever and would be proven wrong by evening. Sansa did not say this. She said, "You are correct. Waiting has become a way for men with titles to pretend to be generous." She turned and pointed without ceremony. "You," she said to a youth with long fingers. "Come and count with this man." She took the youth's hand and planted it atop the man's, and the man blinked, and then grinned despite himself. 1, 2. She counted with them loudly. And the old woman took up the count because old women like to own a number when they can. "When you reach 20, stop," Sansa said. "Then begin again. None will be served who have not been counted. None will be skipped who have been. If any man cuts in, he will stand at the end, and his little sister will be served in his place. I will send to the sept for bowls. They like to count prayers. They may count loaves as well. Nan? N. In the corner of her eye she saw a white cloak. Not one of the boys, but one of the men who were rented whiteness for an hour, and believe it entitled them to preside over other men's bellies. My lady, he said with the oily consonant of those who had been taught to speak harder than they were. This is not a place for the king's sister to be, Sansa said mildly, borrowing the fiction that the city had started to murmur and passing it back to it with a gentle push. And yet here we are. How fortunate. Main. The youth and the man counted. When they reached 20 the first time, the old woman shouted, "Start again," as if giving a cue in a play, and they did. By evening, the clever cousin's cousin had been led to a chair in a warm little room, where Varys' voice made even reproach sound like a lullaby, and had been introduced to the new art of admitting error without bleeding. The gate learned to count in the way Sansa had taught it, and the habit, once learned, proved more stubborn than the hunger that had called for it. When evening fell, Sansa went to the cellars where the keep kept its forgotten light. Varys had asked her to come, not as a whisperer, but as a woman remembering a favor. And she went because to refuse kindness is to teach the city an unhelpful lesson. He led her to a door that had been a door in one century, and then a wall in another, and then, at Varys' gentle insistence, had remembered itself. She stood on one side of a thickness of stone and wood and memory and felt, through it, a man's breath as it slowed between sentences. "You will have an audience of stone," Varys had said with a little half-apology. It cannot answer for him, but sometimes it is a mercy to let words pass, even if they only arrive in the ear of a wall. Tyrion. She said not loudly, and paused. On the other side there was the soft sound of irony remembering itself. "My lady," Tyrion said, and the title was used only to give her back the part of herself that had been taken by so many other words. "I am given visitors of a new sort. I suppose I should be flattered. Do you like my decor? I have a stool. It encourages deep thought and poor posture." Bend a while. Sansa smiled without him to see it. She set her hand upon the stone and felt the rock cool her palm. "They will try you," she said. "They will write the play, and they will give you a role, and then they will pretend you have chosen it. They always do," he said. "When the audience tires, perhaps someone will bleed. It is the only trick the theater in this city remembers after the candles are out." "You were kind to me," Sansa said. She had wanted to say it earlier. She had wanted to leave it unsaid. She had wanted, foolishly, to repay a coin with a coin. "I have not forgotten." Silence has several meanings in a prison. This one had gratitude in it, and the faint scrape of humor learning to walk again. "It has not been the fashion lately," Tyrion said at last. "Kindness. It makes one unfashionable. It looks poorly with all these black cloaks. I have told the boy a story about a river." Sansa said, because it was a thing she could offer him that did not smell of pity. He listens to it every morning, and then it listens back, because he asks it to. "It will need to learn to shout when necessary," Tyrion said gently. "Rivers sometimes must." "Not yet," Sansa replied, and he laughed softly. Once, the sound echoing in stone. "Not yet," he agreed. "If you should see a book lying around the hall with a picture of a duck wearing a crown," he added, and she could hear the smile now, "you might bring it when you come to speak to the wall again. I find my reading inadequate. The stool does not satisfy. Nenderwine see. I will bring you a better stool," Sansa said impulsively, and then shook her head at herself, because foolish promises drown, and take the promiser with them. "I will bring." She thought of Rennie, of Savin, of the girl with the cracked lips. She thought of a cup that had been raised and had become a sword. "I will bring you the knowledge of the day and a cleverness you can spend if you must," she finished. And Tyrion said, after a beat that had sadness in it like a bruise, "That is more than most men are given." When she climbed back toward the air, Varys waited 2 flights up, because he never permitted himself to be discovered too near the place where mercy was dispensed. He had in his hands the belt with pearls he had promised her as a joke. He offered it with 2 hands, and Sansa took it with the grace of a woman, agreeing to a fiction that would keep her and hers alive. "You have done well," he said. "I have done adequately," Sansa corrected. "Adequacy multiplied becomes habit. Habit becomes rule." Varys' smile creased. "You have been listening," he said, and she laughed once properly, in the corridor where the sound would not be quoted against her later. That night, she went to the godswood that was not, and sat by the pool, and did not ask to be heard. She listed instead, in her mind, the things that could be improved by dullness. The manner in which candles were trimmed in the king's hall, the way the girls in the laundry were given scraps of soap, the schedule by which the city watch changed posts, so that no man stood 2 nights in a row in a place where his weak will had already found him, the timing of bread deliveries, so that the smell of baking would reach the street of Floor, at the hour when the pool held her face and then let it go. She let it go with it. In the days that followed, the small council did what small councils always do when a new order attempts to be born inside an old one. It argued its own reflected importance. Lord Tywin divided and combined without seeming to move. Mace blustered. Pycelle murmured. Cersei set fire to water, and was aggrieved when it would not burn. Varys provided silence like linen. Olenna pricked without bleeding. Sansa sat where she had been told to sit, and leaned toward the old woman's deaf ear, and watched men raise their voices to lie. She dropped her handkerchief only once more, when a charter for the baker's measures passed before her, with its tidy numbers and its gaping hole, where enforcement should have been. The handkerchief's fall made a sound no one admitted to hearing, and yet everyone stopped speaking. She bent, gathered it, said, "The king will appoint a mistress of measures," and waited for the laughter. It came, as such laughter always comes, in a mean little trickle from the mouths of men who did not know that wit is a tool, and not a goal. She lifted her eyes and let them settle upon the place over Tywin's shoulder, where a spider had left a ghost of itself. "If the king may take a master of whisperers, who deals in things that cannot be caught, he may take a mistress whose work is simple as weighing. We will not call her mistress." She added, now almost smiling, "We will call her keeper." She will walk with a set of stones and place them upon tables. Men inclined to take a handful more will find themselves observed. They will resent her. They will obey her. In time, they will forget why. "Who is this woman?" Cersei demanded. "Which clever small thing will you put in here to be my judge at the table where I am queen?" "Lady Tyrius Steward's nephew," Sansa said, and felt Olenna's joy like a pinch in her arm. "He counts without moving his lips. He will be keeper. He will learn to be dull and incorruptible. We will tell him dullness is knightly work done without armor. He will inflate with pride at the notion." "Let her have her clerk," Tywin said. "Dullness suits this city better than most things I have given it." "Then we are agreed," Varys murmured, writing the word keeper upon a scrap as if he were recording a christening. "And what shall we give him to bear?" "A rod," Mace said grandly. "A ledger," Pycelle offered, voice like gauze. "A basket of stones," Sansa said, already seeing Rennie's careful fingers choosing from among them the weight that made the scale balance. The word keeper carried itself into the markets as easily as if the city had been waiting for it. It was a humble word, and so the humble accepted it. In Flea Bottom, a woman said she did not care if a man's shoes had gold upon them. She cared that when he put weight upon the scale told the truth. In the Guildhall, a baker who had never been passed over for a loaf gave way with ill grace the first time, and with a sigh, the second, and began, on the third, to reach for the correct weight before the boy with the stones could clear his throat. The habit set. The story grew. The dullness was contagious. At dusk, when weariness made even good men peevish and hungry men dangerous. Sansa made herself walk, without cloak, to the top of the steps that led down to the market by the Blackwater. She stood there for long enough that passers-by adjusted the shape of their days around her. A gutter child, emboldened by her stillness, approached with a fig that he had not paid for in his hand. He saw her see him. He hesitated. Sansa set her face into the line of a woman who could be stern and laid out the lesson she had been given. She took the fig, split it with her thumbnail, gave him the smaller half, and pinched his ear. Not hard, not soft, so that his pride would be pricked, but not pierced. He grinned with his entire face and ran. A woman selling onions laughed despite herself. A watchman breathed. Sansa knew the boy would steal again. Children do, when they must and when they can. What she had bought for her fig was not his reform. It was a story about the city's mother, and sometimes a story is as useful as a law. That night, quite late, she and Margaery sat upon a bench beneath a window that grumbled in a familiar way as the wind thought about changing its mind. Margaery had slipped off her shoes with the sigh of a girl whose day's armor had pinched her toes. "Do you suppose the gods notice?" she asked idly. "When we move stones from one scale to another? Or do they only rouse when we set cities on fire?" "I do not know," Sansa said. "When I speak in the gods' wood here, the water listens and does not answer. In Winterfell the tree answered, or I thought it did, which is the same thing to a girl." "Nendwens. I have no god's wood," Margaery said. "I have a garden, which is not the same, and perhaps better. It is a place that requires the humility to accept that weeds also love the sun." She tilted her head. "Tommen likes you. He sleeps better after you have read to him. Cersei notices. She is making a private tally. When it is long enough, she will present you with it as if it were a bill. We must prepare a purse." "What coin will she accept?" Sansa asked. "Obedience in the shape of withdrawal," Margaery answered. "There will come a time when you will not be at his bedside when she thinks to find you there. She will think she has won a territory. She will tell herself that you have learned a lesson. We must choose the absence and make of it a thing we can spend on a better day." Sansa thought of the way the boy's fingers curled around the cat's ear. "I will leave him Rennie and a river," she said. Margaery laughed softly. "You will leave him a habit. It is the finest gift. I will leave him a crown that does not press too hard upon his brow." She sighed. "And I will leave him a mother-in-law who gnaws her own tail when unattended." "Grandmother would say, 'Do not tie yourself to the tails of creatures that eat themselves,'" Sansa said. And Margaery's laughter became true. There were setbacks, as there always are when one teaches a city a new song. A guardsman stole. He had a sister who drank away his pay, and a mother who wept by rote, and a little boy who clung to his knee, with a possessiveness that made the punishment an act of cruelty done to three. Sansa signed his posting to the sea gate, with a hand that did not shake. In the evening, she went to the steps of the sept, and stood with the women whose hands were raw from scrubbing its stones, and let them see her not weep. In the morning, the boy who had clung to the knee received a bowl of broth made from fish heads, and the first heel from a fresh loaf. It was not justice, it was policy. Justice lives in stories, policy lives in days. A pie came to table shaped like a boar. Sansa had it returned to the kitchen and sent back in the shape of a son. "For the king," she said, and the kitchen girls hid their delight in the way young women hide laughter with wrists across their mouths, showing their eyes as if they were jewels. The women in the laundry received soap cut into neat bars and a piece of ribbon braided around it, because beauty persuades more thoroughly than decrees. The candles in the king's hall were trimmed before supper, always before, and Sansa made a point of praising the light in earshot of the boy. He began in time to look for it, and in looking for it, to think himself a creature who deserved a decent flame. Such small vanities are sturdy foundations upon which to build better ones. Word came from the Vale, as word always comes from elsewhere, in as many costumes as it thinks will get it invited in. Littlefinger had married Lady Lysa, and somewhere between the words there was a smear of red that might have been wax and might have been blood, depending on who told the tale. Varys set the letter upon the table as if it were a wine cup with a crack. "He will send for a girl who used to be his and is not anymore," he said in his mildest tone, and Sansa felt the distant hand of a past that had been inescapable try once more to close around her throat. "Let him find he has misplaced her," Olenna said tartly. "Let him discover that girls grow teeth. We will not send her to be chewed." She turned to Sansa and placed 2 fingers under her chin, lifting at the smallest degree. "Do not look toward the door, child. Look toward the boy." "Oh." Sansa did, and in the days after, when ravens flapped with messages that were both gossip and threat, she chose to stand with a cat on her lap and a book in her hand and a boy's head leaning against her shoulder. On a day that the wind decided to be from the north, bringing with it a clarity that made the city's smells more bearable and its lies more apparent, Sansa walked again to the pool in the godswood. That was not. The beetle had returned to its rib of bark. She did not find in that a sign. She found in it comfort. She sat, and this time she spoke. "I am teaching a city to be bored by cruelty," she said to the water, which rippled and pretended to be ignorant. "I am teaching a boy to ask to be listened to. I am teaching myself to count and not to count, to wait, to give and not be generous, to be seen but not outrageous, to be dull until dullness looks like law." She touched the surface with a fingertip and felt the chill pass through her skin like a small, exact counsel. "When winter comes, and it always does, I will teach it these things too." A leaf lost its hold above her and drifted down. It landed upon the pool and took a while to sink. She watched it. She did not insist it sink quickly. She let it take its time. In the throne room, in a week that had learned the manners of its new habit, Tommen read to her from the river story, his finger moving along the line as if the river ran under his skin. He mispronounced a word, and then, without being corrected himself. Sir Pounce stretched and renamed the room a cat's private parlor. Rennie coughed once, a reminder that milk would be warm when needed and cool when not. In the corner, where shadows liked to gather because it was their right, Varys watched and made of it a small jewel he would drop into the right ear later. Margaery entered without haste, as one does when one is expected because she has made herself so, and not because any man declared it. Cersei, walking a seam between fury and performance with the skill of a woman who has been taught both as if they were virtues, stopped on the threshold when she saw the boy's head upon Sansa's shoulder. She did not rage. She did not scold. She counted, perhaps, as Sansa had been taught to do. She went away, and that too was a victory dull enough to be lasting. At night, alone at last with the winter rose Varys had given her, Sansa unfolded the white cloth she had placed beneath it. It had no stain, but it had learned the shape of the rose by being asked to bear it. She smoothed it with her palm the way her mother had smoothed shirts upon a table. She had loved too much, because they had belonged to a life that had included children at her knees, and an old wolf at her side and halls that answered when called. She set the cloth back and the rose upon it. She lay down and let herself think of snow without flinching, and of summer without bitterness, and of a spring that had made a poor godswood and demanded it be good enough. She did not imagine thrones. She imagined chairs placed correctly for boys to climb down from beds without stubbing their toes. She imagined scales that balanced. She imagined bowls that were filled and made empty and filled again. She slept, and the city, which had not slept properly in a very long time, learned a little to follow her example.